Let's go to Governor Asa Hutchinson of the beautiful state of Arkansas. He is the governor there and kind enough to join us. Governor, I was mentioning about the tone deafness here, and I'm sure Republicans are trying not to suffer the same fate. But when you hear what's happening on the price front, what would be your number one message that Republicans have now to what they argue the president isn't doing now?
Well, I think you characterize it correctly, tone deafness. Whenever you look at the issue of violence in our streets, there's not any specific addressing of that issue. Republicans are making that an issue, and it's on the hearts and minds of the people of America. Whenever you look at, obviously, the inflation, and the president is trying to address that, but unsuccessfully. And the consumers had two big blows this week. I mean, first of all, OPEC made it clear that gas prices are going to go up in the long term, and then we had proof that inflation is going up. And so I just talked to some people in rural Arkansas, and this hits them hard whenever they're driving 30 miles back and forth to a factory to work from their farm. And so they got hit, and I think there is some tone deafness and ineffectiveness on this. That's why the momentum all shifts our direction, because as you go into the election, those are the issues that are on everyone's mind, and this administration is not effectively addressing it.
You know, Governor, well, I also have you here. As you know, this is the final meeting of the January 6th committee. It's going on live as we speak in Washington. I believe Liz Cheney is speaking right now. And I don't know what will change here. I don't know, especially if Republicans take over the House, what happens of a final report. I know it all comes out at the end of this year. But Democrats say the political needle is moving and that this is resonating. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think early on in the hearings, 3-4 months ago, it had an impact, and I think it was capturing the minds of Americans. But since then, you've had hurricanes in Florida, you've had high inflation, violence has increased, and so today it's a non-factor. It might be important substantively, and I believe the whole issue is important. But in terms of the election and moving the popular thinking, it's way past time for that, and I don't believe it'll have any impact.
Do you think, and Liz Cheney notwithstanding, Governor, that this is Donald Trump's party and he is still popular and the nomination to become president is his for the taking?
I do not. I think he's obviously a very powerful voice in the party. He has a large following, but I believe his problems, as well as the way he's handled January 6th, you see a movement away from him and looking for different leadership for our country. And so he's a very powerful voice. He's a factor in many different elections, but there's much more to the Republican story than simply focusing on him. And I think there'll be people looking for different options for 2024 to right the ship of America, but also to put our party on a common sense path.
Part of that common sense path is to seize on the bad economic news, and that it's tailor-made for Republicans to certainly pick up, maybe swap the House, have a good shot at the Senate. Democrats are pointing to continued voting anger among some groups, working moms, for example, females in general, who are upset about that and might show up in droves at the polls to offset, some of the gains Republicans would experience otherwise. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think there's a lot of unpredictability to the election, and that is one element. I think it's going to be important to see what suburban women how they're voting, and whether there's a change, and whether the frustrations or anger manifests itself at the voting booth. But I'd be skeptical, because I think there is intensity on both sides in this election, and I believe the focus has diminished on some of the other hot button issues and shifted to those tabletop issues of inflation and the cost of goods and gas and violence that really impacts every parent whose child is going to school, and you worry about them going to the grocery store. These are real issues, and that's what's going to be driving this election. And I think everything else is taking second place to that.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Governor, I noticed that you were way ahead of the curve, even Virginia Governor Youngkin, and looking at education as an issue. Now, of course, you're going to be in that chairman role of national education policy. And what would be the key thrust for you here?
Well, there's not a more important time. I'm taking on chairmanship of the Education Commission of the States, which 50 states look at best practices in education and help develop a better approach. But it's not a more important time. As you see nationally, our ACT test scores going down. It's a result of coming out of the pandemic. I focused in Arkansas on computer science education. Now I take that to the nation in my role as chair. And we have many governors that are focusing on really this national security issue that we've got to compete, we've got to produce the talent. We don't want to ship it overseas. We don't want to recruit talent from overseas. Let's produce it right here in America. So that's a major focus, but it's beyond that to parental involvement. It's also about the reading skills that are so critical. So a very important time for that, and looking forward to that service.
All right, I wish you well, sir. Governor, great seeing you again. Thank you very, very much.